there, everybody. Thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today I will be taking a look at the final volume of the EC libraries that I got like 2 years ago, and I've been slowly going through them, kind of just reading one a night here and there. I've been saving this one for last because it's Al Williamson, 50 Girls, 50 and Other Stories, illustrated by Al Williamson, kind of the complete collection of his work from EC. Working on Strange Death of Alex Raymond. Dave's kind of style guide that he was giving me was like, try and draw like Al Williamson. And so obviously I looked at a lot of Al Williamson work and became a huge fan of his work. And so this is a real joy. I kind of saved the best for last type of thing. Starts off with a cool little essay. A lot of times I just skim through these or don't read them at all. I read this one a little bit more closely because Al Williamson is obviously an artist I've spent a lot of time reading about and thinking about. So it's really cool to see all this stuff. It's also cool to see all of these photos because he was such a heavy user of photo reference throughout his career. There's all of these photos, and the photos are of his friend group as well, which includes Frank Frazetta, Roy Krinkle, Angelo Torres, and so you get to see a lot of fun, just like them goofing around, posing, acting like action heroes. You can see why Frazetta was such a great artist when it came to anatomy, is he was basically just drawing himself. Dude was yoked, like super shredded, super physically fit. So that's all really exciting. Also, when it's talking about Frazetta, it's kind of talking about in here how he saved Williamson a lot. Earlier in his career, I guess Williamson was kind of would only draw things if he really liked the content, was kind of lazy if he wasn't into something. So here it says that there's this story in here where there's a bunch of roller coasters, and Williamson didn't want to draw that, so he pawned it off on Frazetta, and that was Frazetta's kind of only piece that he did for EC, and it wound up, because of that, kind of being a really important piece. So the cool thing about this is it also has 4 pieces in the back that are either like the Frazetta one where it's Williamson tangential because he passed the job off, or it's inked by someone else like Krinkle or whatever. So that's cool. Those I think are previously uncollected. So I'm just gonna go through, and I got a lot of notes in here, but they're just style things I see developing or whatever. Because this book, like I said, is really interesting to me. It's an early look at Williamson's art while it's still a little rough. Obviously, he's always been very good at these like mossy forest kind of exotic locations. That shows up a lot throughout the book. Most of these stories are written by Feldstein, so he's like this, he just doesn't understand comics from a visual point. He's too much of a writer. It's the heavy, caption heavy stuff. Also the fact that they're like having to cram everything into these pages. He's not allowing space for like, oh my god, here's this awful thing, and then you turn, like this drawing should have been at least half the page when they're introducing this like awful character. But just for format, you got 6, 7, 8 pages to tell a story. You got to cram it all in there. So things like that, I think some of these artists, we're actually losing out by not having some more space for them to do these bigger illustrations that they'll do at the beginning. Usually with the EC stuff, those are always the best. And it's kind of things like that. And then also, like, if Feldman would just shut up and quit writing so much, there would be more room for the art to breathe on the page for them to compose. This story here is one that was inked primarily by Frazetta, so this is cool because you can see Frazetta on top of Williamson, with Williamson's layouts, and then just Frazetta's finishing sensibilities. At the time, it's obvious Frazetta was the much better inker, even though historically Williamson's considered one of the greatest inkers of all time. It's a little rougher here. And you can really see Frazetta teaching him some tricks in terms of range of value, using tones, using the boards that have the tone built into them, the duo shade boards. There's a lot of different textural techniques, scratching, splattering of ink. that show up in this story. And you can see, like in this splash here with the really heavy, thick blacks and grays in front, and then this really light heavenly city in the back with the duo shade board back there. Or no, that's a duo shade board, yeah. And so you just get this like really great sense of depth in there that Frazetta is bringing, and you can see it in the hatching as well. One of the things I do like in a lot of these Feldstein written sci-fi stories, I think he's a much better sci-fi writer than a horror writer, is he seems to be pretty well up on science of the time, casual armchair science, to where he'll actually put some facts in or some lessons. And right here, he's having them figure out mathematically like what their fuel expenditure is going to be. So there is, in the sci-fi stuff, I think, some educational worth to some of these EC stories that you don't get in the horror and the crime stuff. And if they would have leaned into that more and presented more things that way, I think they may have not had as many problems as they did. So it's interesting to see that. In this story, Captivity, you get Williamson inking himself, I think, picking up a lot of the tricks from looking at what Frazetta was doing and the other guys that were inking for him. But like some of the realistic faces here feel much more like Williamson mark making. I don't know how to describe these things as well as I should be able to. I'd have to pull up an image on screen and really show certain types of marks, but this feels more Williamson, and you can see the more photo reference kind of solidity to the proportional structures and stuff there. So yeah, it's just interesting to see a creator like that early on, where he's hitting and missing, and where, like in this sequence here, he's kind of showing his influences. Like this is all has some very Alex Raymond composition, some Alex Raymond use of black and gray. Some of the female faces and things like that are very Alex Raymond. Here you can see a little bit more of the Milt Caniff stuff coming through. Here you can see like a very old school, I could probably even find this like where he traced this from old Flash Gordon. This is very Flash Gordon Raymond. You don't see that like Rip Kirby Raymond show up yet. Williamson's obviously a fan of the earlier stuff. You see a little bit of the later like X9 type, or not X9, but Rip Kirby, in the way that Williamson would look on X9 in panels like this. So that's one of the things that's really cool for me in some of these EC is you have a lot of these artists that are early in their career, and you're seeing the growth and development and where they're pulling from, where they're stealing, where they're getting rid of something and making it more their own. That's really fun. Here's another one of these just really cool opening shots where you wish they had a little bit more room for artists doing such fantastical work to have images like that. But I get it, like the size constraints of the story. You can see that Williamson really falls in love with this duo shade board and uses it quite a bit, and will flip-flop between that and like duotone papers and lots of different texture techniques throughout, which are really interesting to see. This story here winds up being this is a typical Feldstein trick that I kind of actually like, is he'll resituate an old story or a myth in a sci-fi, kind of like this happened on another planet millions of years ago and then it came here. So they're talking about that this is actually, St. George slaying the dragon is actually the sci-fi alien story. So that's kind of fun and interesting there. On this story, Spaceborne, I can see that finally Williamson got like content that he wanted to draw. He said, give me that Flash Gordon, Alex Raymond stuff, and I'll turn in a killer job. And he got it on this one, and you can see it. You can see that he's going all in on this. He's really going in with the stippling in there, kind of the Virgil Finlay. I mean, he's trying to show all his tricks. This is pure Flash Gordon, Alex Raymond there, really going in on the tones, really going in on, just the rendering on everything. The realism ramps up, and you can see what he does when he's interested in a project. Also, like, just the variety of tones that he's using throughout is really cool. He's not just going for value, but like here he's going for one that kind of has an optical illusion going on it and playing that out against a smaller type. So a lot of really interesting texture choices within the value choices as well. there are definitely still moments where Williamson is less interested in the project, and that shows in the artwork. Like if you look at this face here, that's either not him drawing it or it's him kind of phoning it in, versus some of the other more well rendered faces, even in like the story, the previous two stories ago. I believe these are in here chronologically too, so you can see significantly better art 2 jobs ago, and then now kind of phoning it in and doing a hack job on the face. That's all kind of interesting to watch, this consistency struggles of a young artist too, like where you haven't quite learned to overcome the need for inspiration, that you can just apply your skills no matter what the job. Williamson has not reached that point yet. Some really fun like meta tricks going on here, where these aliens come down and they land on a chunk of what like used to be Earth has blown up, and they find a EC weird fantasy comic book. The comic book that they're in, they're reading themselves being in this book. I think that's pretty funny, and you can see here they're reading and they're coming up on the pages that actually show them. That's a really fun, funny meta trick going on in this that I wasn't quite expecting. And this is another one where you can kind of tell Williamson is really enjoying himself. You can see his Wally Wood showing a little bit, like in a panel like this where he gets to deal with the more rubbery characters. It said in the essays that the reason that he has the reason he's even getting work at EC is because Wally Wood recommended him. So that seems to, carry over in a lot of the art, that he's got the Wally, like this right here is so Wally Wood in the background. And I think they're saying that Roy Crinkle did a lot of the background, but then with this much more realistic rendering of the figures over top of it. So you can see that he's coming out of working with Woody, and that's a part of the way that he's constructing his look. Even that like typical Al Williams way of rendering space seems to come from Wally Wood to some extent. He took that and made it his own a little bit. But yeah, there's fun tricks like this. You can see some of the looser inking creeping into, like this more dry brush look that Williamson will employ later on. So some development in style. It just depends on what story you got, how into it he is. And then, yeah, some really, really beautiful art here. It's a little bit hard to tell because you don't know who did what, because they're saying that he would have assistants. So it's a little bit hard to tell how much of all of what I'm seeing and talking about is legitimately Williamson development and not just someone else working over top of him. I think there's a lot more like Wally Wood showing up in this story. The way that the clothes are drawn has that little bit more cartoony rubberiness to it. The faces in here are a little bit more stripped down and simplified like Wally Wood would do. So I think there's a lot of that showing. I really like there's this compositional trick where this is all one shared horizon between these two panels here, even though this one has the spaceship and the characters at a very small scale, and this one has a much larger scale on the figures. So they're obviously not just have moved over to the right, but it creates this kind of sense of unity up here on the page, which is really nice. Then over here we get something that I didn't see much of in this book, but you get the typical lazy-eyed Al Williamson girl. That's something I noticed a lot in looking at his X9 strip work, his Star Wars strip work, his Star Wars work that he did on the movie adaptations. There's a real tendency, especially when his women look to the side, to draw one of the eyes coming in too much. The pupils aren't pointing the same. I tried to talk to Dave Sim about this and asked him if he knew why that was when we were working on Strange Death, because I was noticing it. And I noticed that Dave always had like lazy eyes and tongue sticking out on the models on Glamourpuss. And since his style for Glamourpuss was based on Al Williamson, I wondered if the cross-eyed girls on the covers were like a little in-joke, and Dave didn't really seem to acknowledge that, and he didn't seem to acknowledge what I was talking about either, like he hadn't noticed it or he didn't really care or something. His only comment was that some photos of Al Williamson's wife maybe look like when she looked to the side, like when she looked straight ahead, her eyes would be fine. I think his wife's name was Corey. That when she would look forward, her eyes would be straight, but some of the photos from the side suggested she had a weaker, lazier eye when she looked to the side. So it's interesting that he may have been being too accurate to his models, to where so many of his women wound up looking cross-eyed. Like go look at your Al Williams stuff, and any Al Williamson stuff you have and look at, especially when the eyes are turned on a 3/4 view like that, the eye on the far side will always be turned in a little bit too much. It's a very, very strange feature of his art. This woman has it as well. This bit of dialogue up here is just funny to me from like how language changes over time. So in the caption up here it says, "We started to talk. I looked her over. She wasn't bad for her kind. She told me her name. She drank like a fish and she could sure hold it. Her eyes got a little bleary, but otherwise she was okay. Just a little gay." I had to think that was pretty funny because like when he's coming here, he's talking about not bad for her kind, and you know, you could take that as like in a modern parlance, that whole sequence would read about like, hey, you know, look at that cute lesbian over there. So just fun to see how language changes over time, and I like when they preserve that stuff. They don't try and like translate the past. This image cracked me up. This looks a little bit more like he's now looking at this looks more like a Stan Drake type of drawing to me, especially the pushed up bosom. But yeah, I had to crack up here. This lady definitely got her seducing bra on. But yeah, something about that suggests like a different kind of model source for how he's approaching the drawing than this. Is very Alex Raymond right here, but this feels a little more Stan Drakey to me. It could just be because she's a blonde. This story here called 50 Girls 50, which is what the book is named after, I think this is a really strange choice to name the book after, because not only it's not the best art in the book, I'll say that, but the story in it's like just absolutely super despicable, where you have this guy in a ship full of 50 men and 50 women that are cryogenically frozen for space travel, and he has woken up early so he can basically wake up the women one by one and seduce them all and sleep with them all, and like he'll get old but they never will, and he just has this supply of fresh young babes on his spaceship trip to Venus or wherever they're going. It's a pretty despicable story, even though obviously it flips in the end and comes back on him. It's a strange one. You could see why parents at the time that were reading this stuff would be like, "What are you teaching my kid? You're teaching him to like basically roofie and rape women? No thanks." Yeah, there's a story here called I, Rocket, which is a really cool story about a sentient spaceship, and it makes the captions work because of that. The captions are the spaceship talking about what's going on inside of it. This one also has some of the coolest texture work. Like here, he's working with the grease crayon or something like that to get these pencil textures over here. There's some more of that kind of stuff here. Then there's some kind of duo shade board that has a texture on it. There's a cutout what looks to be like a pencil panel on here. Luckily on this one I also have, and I haven't showed, but at some point I'm gonna have to go through this as like a artist edition review. I have the Flesk publication Al Williamson Strange World Adventures. Sorry, this probably isn't gonna fit all on screen, but really cool because this has the full story in the original art, and we can kind of compare production-wise how well they did. There are a lot of details lost in this, and that's a little bit sad to me because obviously the original art exists. You can get a hold of it, and when you hear me talk about reproduction on the channel, and people say like, "Oh, Fantagraphics has great reproduction." Yes, pretty good. But if you see the original art and you see how much is lost, you see how much fill in there is. Like right here on this branch, if you look at the original, there's texture, dry brush, there's duotone dots all throughout here. There's these nice drippy pieces. There's some like dry brush all throughout here. That all gets like just turned into black. None of the subtlety of it comes through. And when you're also looking at like Al Williamson doing feathered hatching here on the duo shade board to create these really teeny tiny lines of dots, you can see how much lighter those techniques are on here versus on here, and also how much darker these areas get. And so these get darker, everything just gets a little bit muddier. Or like you could see on the nose of the plane the thinness of the hatching all the way throughout here, There's some more variability in the black, some areas that aren't all filled in, and then in here it just totally flattens out. So I would really encourage people to get, get an artist edition for something that you think is really, really well reproduced, in this, and then try and get the artist edition and compare them, because when you look at this stuff, you'll see like this panel actually produces pretty well, like they were able to capture it, but some of the softness of the effect goes away and it gets a little clumsier here. But then if you compare, say, like panels like this, you can really see some of the loss. Actually, this one's not that bad. They captured some of the dry brush and stuff pretty well. This page is a little bit better adjusted, but you can see some of the fill in on the hatching up in here. This one's actually pretty good. So it's fun to look at these stories, I think, and compare them to the original artwork, especially when you have something like this that has a lot of this duo shade paper with stuff being rendered on top of it. It's interesting to see how the effect translates over. But also you can look at the line art and see that there's two lines here to create an edge, and here it's all like blacked in. So you know that you're getting some thickening of the lines, which means you're getting thickening of the lines in here on the duo shade as well. And so things are getting darker, and that I tend to call that gummed up. Sean, the technical term is like the black is filling in, but it just looks like a little gummy and clogged to me. And for someone like me who's spent a lot of time making original art and a lot of time looking at scans of these artists' original art, it's just kind of obvious to me when I look at a book, even like this, that's actually pretty well produced and look like they either had access to the original negatives, which were well shot, or they had the original artwork and they still just didn't quite adjust it right. But I can see those things. I know most people can't, but they're very immediately obvious to me when things are filled in, when there's a lot of details going on in this figure that are taken out. That's obvious to me. So it's really nice to have the artist edition to compare it to. Otherwise you'd be like, you know what, I guess he just kind of, like, they're getting a lot of good textural variation, I guess he just kind of drew thicker. And it's just, the reason I harp about it is because when someone puts in such a masterful performance, and then this like whole tree would have had beautiful dry brush textures and stuff all over it, I don't get to see it because it's been edited out in the process. So that's why I go on about that. Like, the guy deserves to have his work seen if it can. This story here and a couple other stories, they use the term BEM, bug-eyed monsters. I'd only ever seen that in Gilbert Hernandez's early, like the issue 1 of Love and Rockets. I didn't know that that was a term at the time that would have been popular and shows up in sci-fi. I've never heard that before, so that was just a cool little moment. Really, really enjoy the drawing here. Again, Williamson using something like a grease crayon or a black color pencil or something like that to create real tonal variation and get some gradients and shading on here, but also have it like just grab the tooth of the paper so it looks like, textural. One of the things I noticed in the like artist edition is that he was very willing to use different type of papers, like cut and paste it all over the board. Like this is a duo shade paper, and then maybe this was done on a toothy piece of drawing paper. So he'd change based on the textures that he wanted. And I think that's really, really smart. In the essays in here, they're saying, oh, he's lazy and was messy and would cut and paste, and it kind of drove everyone crazy. But I think some of that was him making wise kind of material decisions. You can see that on this page too, just the variety of tones and textures. There's like some duo shade here, there's more like a noise pattern here and here, there's some more duo shade there, there's a lot of splattering, there's a dot tone pattern, a flat one, there's one with a gradient here, there's a couple different things going on in this panel. Over here there's like a dot pattern with the gradient, a couple different dot patterns. This panel here has like 3 or 4 different things all within it. Same up here. Someone who is really painting with value and thinking about the image in black and white, super inspirational to me. And this is where you can start to see the Al Williamson as someone who designs images as an inker really coming into play. Like the use of black and gray compositionally is phenomenal all throughout. In this more horror-driven story, Take Care, you can see Williamson really pushing outside of his comfortable boundaries. He's trying to work a little bit looser. You can see a looser brush line. It looks like he's much more influenced by someone like William Gibson in these images. He's got that looser, like scratchier, old school pen and ink master style. And that's another thing that like I said, is cool in this book, is depending on what kind of project he's using, he's trying out different things. You see a young artist cycling through their influences and groping, and it's very obvious that Williamson had a huge respect for the lineage of pen and ink artists in general, not just Alex Raymond, you know, that always gets talked about as his main touch point. And so you see a lot of this like looser, scratchier, trying to draw a little bit more wild in a couple of these, which I think is really cool as well. And that's Williamson learning to be a good inker. He's not quite there yet. That some of it's a little clumsy in some places. Then he's going to go from here and work with John Prentice on the Rip Kirby strip, and he's going to learn from someone who could mimic Alex Raymond very well, how to draw like Alex Raymond. He's going to have a 3-year apprenticeship there. Speaking of Alex Raymond, it's really funny because in this adaptation of the Bradbury story, The Sound of Thunder, this is a 1954 adaptation of a 1952 story, so pretty quick. And that's where you see Feldstein, you know, he's up on sci-fi for sure, and I think sci-fi is his best writing. The two characters here look exactly like at least how Dave Sim was drawing Alex Raymond in The Strange Death of Alex Raymond. So it wouldn't be surprising to me if Dave was using this as like, okay, how would you draw Alex Raymond in the Al Williamson style? This is two pretty good faces right here for that. So that's a fun little bit. I don't know, that mustache and hairstyle would have been popular, so I don't know if that was intentionally him shouting out, you know, to his hero or not. But they really caught my eye as Raymond-looking people. And then this is obviously the story where he steps on the butterfly, and that changes history dramatically. Kind of a famous story for that. And I had to look that up, and that's not where the term butterfly effect came from, but it's definitely where it entered into popular culture. So that's pretty cool to have evidence of that, is that the Ray Bradbury story introduced that, and that it would have been more widely introduced to children through this EC comic in particular, I'm sure. And on this last panel here, you can actually see some really like almost looks like straight to ink type of drawing, where you can still see like the hand and stuff. Some of the figuring out of the anatomy is going on. You could see Williamson phoning it in a little bit, I think, but actually winding up with something a little more emotive also, which is cool. So he's not great at it yet, but he's learning to go wild and cut loose. He just hasn't been doing that for long enough to have perfect control over it. This really great couple illustrations here. Again, tons of use of texture and tone and splatter. You know, I tend to, I think of these artists as pretty controlled artists, and it's nice to see them doing such uncontrolled techniques mixed in with that. That's very inspirational. This story here, Food for Thought, is penciled by Williamson and inked by Roy Krinkle. You can see a or finished probably, you can see a very big difference in approach in the inking, like the hatching all through here to get every little blade of grass. The amount of detail really goes up. The more impressionistic Al Williamson inking goes away. But in the faces, I see a much higher level of realism in the finished inking, that this looks a lot more like peak Williamson on X9 or something like that, where he's working with himself as a model, or Frazetta or somebody, and they've got this nice like double lighting, and they handle that really well. But I think at this point, these more realistic faces are thanks to Krinkle's ability as an inker than it is to Williamson. And you know, Williamson must have been learning from these guys that he was sharing a studio with and all of his time with. And that's part of the collection of stories in the back that are done by people either in collaboration with Williamson, or like this Frazetta piece, just done basically replacing Williamson on a story he didn't want to do. So this is a story that's all happening just like at a beach, and like with a fair next to it, like Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk or something. And like they said, Williamson didn't want to draw all this down to earth stuff, and he definitely didn't want to draw all of the roller coaster imagery, so he passed it off to Frazetta, and thank goodness, because Frazetta nailed it, right? Like, you'll see who was the better artist early on and who was learning from whom, and just really, really stellar art all the way throughout by Frazetta. Like I said, obviously, when he's drawing someone like this, the reason he can do it so accurate, I mean, like, look at that. That's basically, I think, that shot from the beginning. I think that is. Yeah, that's the shot that was taken for that right there. So you can see, like, this is just Frazetta. The face looks like him. He's handsome. He's buff. Like, he's just drawing himself. And, you know, when you're that good and you have that great of a model, like, the art's going to be good. Like, that's just Frazetta's arm right there. Dude was shredded. And so that's really cool. I think it's strange that that's one of the highlights of an Al Williamson book, but it really, really is, seeing that. Then you get another one that's done in collaboration with Roy Krinkle. Not quite as detailed as the other one, a little rougher, but still really cool. It predicts, I think, where we're headed. It has the perfection of the scene, you fools, mechanical music, robot dancers, coldly oiled entertainment, you fools. I think that's kind of where we're headed with the AI stuff, this coldly calculated, humanless entertainment. So there are these moments where Feldstein is really doing some good writing, but my sense is that it's all derivative of other better people like Bradbury that he's reading, and not so much these original ideas of his own. I could be wrong, but that's my sense. Then there's a piece in here by Angelo Torres, another one of the group, like Williamson, Krinkle, Torres, Frazetta. They had a name. They mention it in here. So a very influential group for a good reason. They're all great illustrators. And then a George Evans piece with Al Williamson on pencils, George Evans on inks. You can see, you know, again, kind of stylistically what Evans brings to the inking, a little bit more realistic, a little bit more cinematic. Some really, really cool texture techniques, again, that are very not Williamson. Williamson's a little bit more graphic with his rendering of outer space. This is more, well, there's a new term I'm going to start using on the channel a lot, I think, so I'll just start using it now. I'm going to review a book I'm not quite done with, but there's the book I read recently that distinguishes between graphic and what they call vudic, like more painterly, with a fuller range of values rather than graphic, which is very just off on binary, black or white. Something like this, which is more painterly or impressionistic, would be vudic. So someone who's working more vudic, whereas I think that's how it's pronounced. That's how I'm going to pronounce it. Like more view-based, more there, more present, more realistic, versus the graphic, which is more linguistic and communicative. I think Williamson, as realistic as he is more in line with the graphic. He just happens to use that to make fairly realistic images, whereas something like this is a little bit closer to the full range of values, and so isn't as punchy and dynamic, but is still really cool to look at. Another really, really cool thing in this book that's not like part of the stories proper, it's just a little one-page thing here in the essays in the back, is there are these examples here of Bernie Krigstein inking over Williamson, which is way cool to have Bernie Krigstein ink in your stuff. But Williamson didn't like it, so he gave the job back, and this story got redone with Frazetta on inks, and Williamson liked that better. And it's really cool to see these two very different artists take this same one artist and ink them so differently. Like this one in particular, they both put in different backgrounds behind this tree. Like this one has a moon and like more trees, and Frazetta put in a whole mountain back there. Like, I don't know, obviously there was a shape here kind of in that, but they both interpret different ways. And also to see that they pretty much had the exact opposite instincts on where to go with the heavy blacks, like heavy blacks here, light here, you know, dark back there, light back there, whether this being dark, this being light. I actually think from the graphic standpoint, from a distance, like the Krigstein, because he's more of a cartoonist, he has that more graphic sense, whereas Frazetta as a painter has the more vudic sensibility. And so from a distance, I think the punch of this image would read better being more graphic, and this one having more variation in value probably wouldn't read as much. So kind of funny to see, you know, where Williamson at this point is aligned between those two things. one cool thing that was nice to see is that he was trained at the Byrne Hogarth Cartoonists and Illustrator School, which is now SVA, the School of Visual Arts, where he met Krinkle and Wally Wood. In working on Strange Death, I wondered for a long time if there was like a inker training program that would have taught them some of these basic brush moves that produce certain shapes. There's like a vocabulary of shapes that I noticed in the Raymond inspired artwork. A lot of those shapes don't show up in the, like these are actually more milk caniff looking shapes, but that's an image that's constructed out of these shapes. There's a lot of Williamson stuff at this point in time where it seems more like he's going in and rendering specific details of a specific fold to look exactly the way it looks on the thing, and there's less of these more cartooning calligraphic type of marks. There's a lot there, but going and apprenticing with John Prentice and going to the Hogarth School and stuff, there must have been some kind of brush technique class, and I really wish we knew what that was and could recover it, because there's a very specific vocabulary of like 15 marks or something like that that shows up in a ton of artists' work at that time period, and just through tracing over their work with a brush to try and figure it out, I've been able to recover some of how to do that. But it seems like everyone was doing these certain type of marks, and so there must have been some training, whether it be in the studios in the apprentice system or whether it be at the Hogarth School. I don't know. But also cool, I didn't know that the Byrne Hogarth School is what led to SVA, so that basically SVA is a Hogarth founded school, which is pretty cool. So a lot to really enjoy in this book, a lot to think about, a lot to learn from, and definitely one of my favorite of these because of the writing and stuff. And I haven't really enjoyed reading these, so I'm probably not going to get too many more of these EC library ones, especially given the fact that the art's not perfectly reproduced. I'd rather just go get EC artist editions and enjoy the art for the art, because that's what I'm here for. I'm here for the art. It's not very well reproduced in here, as you can see, compared to the artist edition. And then the Kurtzman written stuff I really like, but the Feldstein stuff, no. So that's probably going to determine which, if any, of these books I buy going forward. I don't think this is as essential to have the complete library as some other people seem to, because it's not as, the art's not as well represented as people think it is. And I know that's not Fantagraphics' fault, it's the fault of what resources are available, but I'm in it for the art, and unless I'm getting perfect reproduction, I'm not really worried about it. So probably no more of these for me, but I will keep an eye out for EC artist editions, because these artists are all really good. The Eisner nominated The Strange Death of Alex Raymond by Dave Sim and myself. This is a gorgeously illustrated and designed book, Dave doing most of the illustration. Amazing compositions throughout. What Dave is doing is he's recording his obsession with the death of master cartoonist Alex Raymond behind the wheel of Stan Drake's car when they got into a car crash. The best description of the book that I've heard is that it's like understanding comics with pages like this, mixed with something like From Hell, when you get into the theories about, you know, what actually happened with the car crash. And then with Sean on production, it's just one of the most gorgeously printed books you could get a hold of.